All right, y'all. Welcome to the show. What do I got for you today? So, Ben Shapiro commented on the Richard Dawkins clip, which went viral, where he described how he considers himself a cultural Christian. And of course, Ben can't help himself but take a bunch of shots at atheism. So we'll dive into that. I got a lot to say about that one. We have Fox Business hosts absolutely melting down over a $20 minimum wage for fast food workers in California. That's really something to behold. And then later on, the Libs of TikTok creator struggles to define wokeness, which is something that we've seen a number of times now, where people who sort of make their whole politics based around wokeness being bad struggle to even give a basic definition of what they mean by that. And then later on, we have a corporate profits bonanza, a great article from Judd Legum where he lays out how the majority of the inflation that we've seen is a direct result simply of corporate greed. It's got nothing to do with big spending. At this point, it's much less about the supply chain. It is simply corporations being like, hey, we can get away with price gouging people, so let's go ahead and price gouge people. And then also we have Stephen A. Smith, my favorite enlightened centrist on the planet, decides to take some shots at Hillary Clinton. And I must say, it is a glorious clip if I've ever seen one. So we'll talk about all that and more. Everybody do me a big favor. Subscribe to the channel. Hook a brother up. If you're not subbed, I don't know what the hell you're doing with your life. Trying to get to 10 million subsies. Need your sub. Hook me up. And let's go ahead and jump into it. So as I pointed out, Ben Shapiro commented on Richard Dawkins calling himself a cultural Christian. And he does this long segment where he basically weaves this giant argument about how you can't base a society around non-belief, bro. And so we're going to have some fun. We're going to watch this, and we're going to break it down. I have him on 1.25 times speed, but I reserve the right to take him off of that because with Ben Shapiro, 1.25 is like double speed. So we'll see how I feel. Let's watch.
Dawkins has for a very long time been the most famous atheist on planet Earth. Obviously, he's written extensively about why Christianity and Judaism and Islam and all religions are wrong. He's written about the so-called God delusion, this idea that a belief in a higher power is in fact a delusion, but he has simultaneously called himself a cultural Christian. So here he was on LBC talking about his views of cultural Christianity.
Well, I must say I was slightly horrified to hear that Ramadan is being promoted instead. I do think that we are culturally a Christian country. I call myself a cultural Christian. I'm not a believer. But there's a distinction between being a believing Christian and being a cultural Christian. And so, I love hymns and Christmas carols, and I sort of feel at home in the Christian ethos. I feel that we are a Christian country in that sense. It's true that statistically the number of people who actually believe in Christianity is going down, and I'm happy with that. But I would not be happy if, for example, we lost all our cathedrals and our beautiful parish churches. So I count myself a cultural Christian. I think it wouldn't matter if we substituted any alternative religion. That would be truly dreadful.
Okay, but we have substituted an alternative religion, and that religion is paganism, because the reality is that when you cut off a civilization from its Judeo-Christian roots, what you end up with is a paganistic replacement for that religion.
All right, that's just made up. That's just made up. There is no official pagan replacement for a Judeo-Christian system. First of all, a lot of the countries that these guys consider Judeo-Christian countries are actually secular. So let's get that out of the way first, right? That a lot of these countries, which are considered Christian because the majority of the population is Christian, they're not actually definitionally Christian, they're more secular. But the idea that if you don't, have a society based on Christianity, that it's based on paganism? No. It could just be totally agnostic on the question of theism or deism. So it's agnostic on any semblance of religion and also agnostic on the idea of, like, is there a God? Like, the government doesn't have to comment on whether or not they think there's a God, right? So he just makes stuff up, but he says it confidently. So I think some people hear it and they're like, that must be true. He said it confidently. But stop and think about it. If we don't have a society based on Christianity or Judeo-Christian values, that goofy phrase they like to use, why does it necessarily follow that it's going to be based on paganism? What are you talking about?
It devolves into paganism pretty quickly because all of the central premises of humanism, things like reliance on human reason, make an argument for human reason as an independent force. You cannot, from an evolutionarily biological perspective. You can't. You can.
Now who's like the philosopher king debate bro in college class. Make an argument for human reason. You can't do that. What?
That human beings are capable of using their brains in order to adapt to their environment. You cannot say that human beings are capable of searching for truth. There is no such thing as truth in evolutionary biology. There's just what's effective and what's not effective. Everything is utilitarian in nature.
Now who's the postmodernist? What even is like objective truth, bro? This is an argument that the right makes against the left all the time. It's Jordan Peterson's whole shtick. The left believes that there's no such thing fundamentally as objective truth, and that's a war on reality. That was a terrible Jordan Peterson impression. It's early. Give me a break on that. But like, what is he talking about?
Of using their brains in order to adapt to their environment. You cannot say that human beings are capable of searching for truth. There is no such thing as truth in evolutionary biology. There's just what's effective and what's not effective. Everything is utilitarian in nature.
Yeah, but that can be true, and it also can be true that you look for the truth to determine the mechanisms of how that functions, right? What's he doing? What's he doing? All of a sudden, he sounds like a postmodernist trying to make the argument you can't base a system on not being religious.
You can't make the case for higher concepts like justice or freedom if you are operating from a non-God-based universe.
Of course you can. You're saying there can't be a conception from an atheist of like justice? Why would you make such a ridiculous claim? I'd venture to guess that the majority of people who would describe themselves as secular, atheist, or agnostic, or just not religious, anti-theist, they would tell you, yes, I have a conception of what is justice, what is right, what is wrong. Like, he's got a real, like, he's beaten up on a straw atheist in his mind. The idea of an atheist who's like totally vapid and vacuous and rejects the notion of concepts of justice and right and wrong. And that's just, like, you're just straw manning atheists. The majority of atheists would say, yeah, of course I have a concept of what constitutes justice and injustice, etc.
You might be able to live that way individually. You can be like Richard Dawkins and be an atheist and be a cultural Christian. But you cannot separate the church building that he is praising there off from what goes on inside the church.
Yes, you can. Like, his point is, I like the Christmas carols, I like the hymns, so like I like the music, and effectively, you know, that's why I call myself a cultural Christian. I actually agree with Ben. It's annoying he calls himself a cultural Christian in the sense that, like, you spent your whole life beating up on religion. You're the world's #1 atheist, and now it's just like you throw your hat in the ring with like, well, I'm going to be tribalistic to some extent. I'm going to throw my lot in with this religious group. And it's like, okay, that's pretty weaselly. But the idea that you can't like certain things about the culture while not believing in it, of course that could be the case. Guys, what is Christmas nowadays anyway? Over 90% of the United States celebrates Christmas. Only 72% of the country is Christian. So you have some people who are not Christian who celebrate Christmas. Why? It's become its own thing. I hate to say it, but it's about materialism. It's about consumerism. It's about a fat guy in a red suit with a big beard who we pretend comes down the chimney, right? That is mixed with some pagan type ritualistic stuff. Easter. Okay, the resurrection of Christ, but also, there's a freaking bunny and colorful eggs and candy. Like, of course you could separate out. Like, I don't believe in the literal word. I don't believe in the nonsense stories. I don't even believe that this gets at the core of some fundamental human truth. But I like it when we do the Easter bunny stuff. I like it when we do the Santa Claus stuff. Of course you could do.
Is an outward manifestation of the soul that is the church. The same thing is true of our civilization. Our civilization is built in a particular way on particular frameworks and foundations. And when you destroy those foundations and frameworks, what you end up with is secularist pursuit of values that ends up undermining itself and eating itself. You end up with postmodernism.
He was the one who was just making a postmodernist argument. He was the one who just made a postmodernist argument. Talk about, well, when it comes to evolutionary biology, there is no truth. Yes, there is. It also, you know, the process itself is, it like determines survival of the fittest and things of that nature, right? So I understand what his argument was, but there's also, you're trying to discover objective truth when you look at that stuff. So you were the one making the postmodernist argument 2.5 seconds ago.
The reason that postmodernism is a natural outgrowth is because it is a natural decay. You go from a thriving civilization, an Enlightenment civilization that was in fact rooted in Judeo-Christian values. This is why, for example, when it comes to capitalism, Adam Smith wrote Theory of Moral Sentiments before he wrote Wealth of Nations. Theory of Moral Sentiments is an entire book about virtue and the necessity thereof. And then he wrote Wealth of Nations, which was predicated on the idea that when you have a civilization that does in fact promote virtue, capitalism can thrive.
So the implication here is capitalism is the natural outgrowth of having virtues as the bedrock of your society. Like, it is the moral system that grows out of having these proper Judeo-Christian values, which is kind of hilarious because anybody who reads the Bible, anybody who reads the New Testament and comes out with the idea thinking that Jesus is a capitalist needs their head examined. The guy is a communist before communism was a thing. There are so many contradictory things in the Bible, but there are also things that are not at all contradictory. In some areas, it is remarkably consistent. All throughout the New Testament, it's treat the sojourners like they're your family members, like they're your friends. That's literally the word they use for immigrants. So be super kind to immigrants. Is that what Ben Shapiro likes to do? Is that what the right likes to do nowadays? How often does Jesus have to invoke this notion that the rich can't get into heaven? It's only the poor and the downtrodden and the left behind. Those are the ones who can get into heaven. This guy was a hippie commie before hippies or communism was a thing. The idea that he would, be okay with people going bankrupt over medical bills? Like, what are we talking about here? Jeez, this is such a confused rant on his part. He's trying to make the argument you can't have a moral society without a religious core of it. But obviously the huge gaping hole in his argument is that in the past we've had hyper-religious societies, and they were actually some of the most immoral societies. Like the Crusades was based on a hyper-religiosity, right? Like the heart of Christendom, I think is how you say it. Christendom, however you say it. Like, that's when you get the Crusades. People who are drunk on their religion and so sure that they're right, and so sure they want to spread their values by a sword. So, and also, hyper-religious societies. Israel, an ethno-state and a theocracy. Hyper-religious society. Islamic theocracies. Those are very religious. I don't like any theocracies. The idea that a Judeo-Christian framework leads to good outcomes. No, what happens is these idiots like to pretend like all of the positive things we got from the Enlightenment, they just attribute it to the Judeo-Christian framework. And it's like, that's 100% wrong. You had secular forces had to fight back the draconian religious forces to get us any semblance of what we would call positive today, like egalitarianism, for example. Universalism. Like, it's so confused. He thinks the core of everything that's good is a Judeo-Christian framework for our society. When that shit is much more likely to get you burning witches at the stake, oppressing gay people and all sorts of minorities, including religious and ethnic minorities. Like, that's what that sort of system gets you. It's not, human rights and justice and egalitarianism. That's all an outgrowth of secularism and the Enlightenment.
Same thing is true of things like free speech. These all exist on deeper foundations. Those deeper...
Yeah. Religion, well known for being a friend of free speech. All the religions were a massive enemy of free speech. The church tried to censor people who would, try to take on their truths, what they determined as truth, which of course wasn't at all true. Blasphemy, right? Like that was a big thing. Oh, Jesus, he's so wrong on every level.
Foundations are religious in nature. Trying to separate those off, pretending that they are the natural state of the world, is historically ignorant. History is in fact contingent. The Enlightenment rests on Christian bases.
Nonsense. The Enlightenment had to butt up against Christianity and fight all religious dogmas.
Pretending that it does not means that you end up severing the two. And an Enlightenment severed from its Christian bases ends in terror.
Whereas, a religious-based society never becomes a terror. Please.
Actually ends in gulags and death camps. The cost of...
Oh, my God. Oh, and we cut to an ad. This is so classic Ben Shapiro, making horrible, shitty arguments and cutting to an ad. Let's jump ahead and not listen to the ad. Birch Gold, he's hawking some gold scam now. That's great. Tell me more about your religiosity, Ben, as you hype your gold scam.
98, that's Ben, to 98. This is the point that Nietzsche was making near the end of the 19th century. He was making the case that when you kill God, you don't, in fact, end up with a higher secular humanism. You end up with a pagan pursuit of power. You end up with the pursuit of the Ubermensch, because you live in a cold, meaningless universe in which will is the only thing that matters. Power is the only thing that matters.
So, in other words, he is insisting that if you have a society that's non-religious, it necessarily ends in people being more ruthless and vicious and power hungry. Well, Ben, I got bad news for you. The ruthless, vicious, power hungry thing, that's just like a part of human nature. So are good things like empathy and community and stuff like that, love, but like that's just part of human nature. The idea that the more secular a society is, the more likely you get to that outcome, that's just fundamentally not true. There's been deeply religious wars. There's been wars that have nothing to do with religion at all and are more about natural resources, for example. There's been murderous dictators who are religious and aren't religious. There's been extremists of all kinds. The idea that a Judeo-Christian framework sort of protects you from bad excesses is silly. It's a child's reading of history.
This is why the arguments that are currently made about how, for example, freedom of speech is just a guise for power. This is the argument the left makes against freedom of speech. Property rights.
Okay, let's be clear. Most leftists do not oppose freedom of speech. Like, he's just assuming that everybody on the left is like anti-free speech and they make some power argument to justify censorship or whatever. You just fired Candace Owens because she said stuff about Israel you didn't like. So spare me your sanctimonious, holier than thou, we love free speech, you guys hate free speech nonsense. You and Dave Rubin were just jerking each other off about how the Daily Wire letting somebody go who has bad opinions is okay because we're a publisher, we're not a platform, so we're allowed to be censorious, and it's not actually censorious.
Are not about the natural outgrowth of human beings want to create and to cultivate. They are, in fact, an imposition by a powerful cadre of people who are attempting to victimize you. They are bad. They're a tool of the patriarchy. Those ideas are natural outgrowths of severing natural law. That's a natural outgrowth of suggesting that the universe is, in fact, not ruled by a creator who created a human nature, and that human nature has natural consequences like property rights, or should have those natural consequences. That the freedom of the mind that is guaranteed by Genesis 1:27, where it says we're all made in the image of God, meaning that we are creative and capable of will. And when you cut that off, you end up with everything is just power dynamics and power relations. As a civilization, you cut yourself off from your roots, and what you end up with is Scotland passing laws suggesting that you cannot speak freely on matters of whether a man is a woman or not.
And religious societies pass laws about how blasphemy is wrong, apostasy is wrong. You know, you're not allowed to question the dogmas of the church or Jesus' resurrection back in the day. This is just so dumb. Basically, the argument is this. Bad things come out of societies that are non-religious. Good things come out of societies that are Judeo-Christian based. That's an idea that nobody should even take remotely seriously. You can debunk it instantly. Like, why would you make such a bad argument?
And whoever is in power gets to cudgel the other side. That's the
yeah, because they don't do that. If somebody's Jewish or Christian, and conservative, they never do that. They never bash the other side.
consequence. So people have asked me many times, can there be a moral atheist? Sure, there can be a moral atheist. Can there be a system built on atheism that is moral? No.
Come on, bro. Come on. Okay. The societies in the world today that self-report the highest quality of life and the most happiness. Ready for this? They're in the Scandinavian region, and they are some of the most non-religious areas in the world. The idea that you need religion to create a moral society is laughable. Religion can be used for good. Religion can also be used for horrible things. So, again, I reiterate, how can you make such a bad argument? I like how he thinks he's being kind by conceding. You can have a moral individual atheist, yes, but you cannot base a society on it and have it be a good society. I mean, there are plenty of atheists, agnostics, secularists, societies that are very far in that direction on the spectrum that are phenomenally successful, as opposed to other countries which are super religious, which are not. So, just so bad.
There cannot be a civilizational system built on atheism. This is why when Richard Dawkins says he's a cultural Christian, the question that we should all be asking ourselves is twofold. One, is he right that our civilization rests on Christian foundations? And the answer is yes, of course he is right about that.
No. Because what he's doing is he's giving Christianity the credit for all of the progress made by secularism and the Enlightenment. And that I 100% reject. As the world's leading atheist, what Richard Dawkins should be doing is not calling himself a cultural Christian, throwing in his lot with this other religious tribe which has gotten so many things wrong over the years. What he should be doing is making a proactive case for secularism and universalism, for a progressive, humanistic worldview. That's what you should do. It's not like your only options are Christian culture or Islamic culture, or Christian culture, Jewish culture, and Islamic culture. It is on the menu to have a secular humanist culture. It is on the menu to have a universalist culture. And they act like that's not the case. And they're horribly incorrect. This is a false dichotomy they're presenting you.
The second question we should ask is, then why are we destroying those Christian foundations? If the church building exists, but there's nobody inside, how long do you expect the civilization to thrive?
Very long time, actually. In fact, I think the more we are held back by religious dogmatism, the worse we are. That's not to say that religion can't, in some instances, for some people, do good. Of course, it can. But it's also historically been used for so much bad, and he just overlooks that and acts like it doesn't exist. And again, gives credit to Christianity for things that the Enlightenment and secularism brought us.
If the civilization built on the Bible discards the Bible, how long do you expect that civilization to continue along the lines it has previously continued? And the argument by Dawkins and other atheists presumably will be, yes, but all that's untrue. Those would be necessary myths, but they're necessary myths, but they're myths. And so truth matters more. So first of all, I would ask, how are you defining truth? Because according to, again, folks like Richard Dawkins, and again, I like a lot of Richard Dawkins' work. It's really interesting. But according to folks like Richard Dawkins, when he says, we can't believe the Bible because it's not true, my question is, what in evolutionary biology suggests that truth is of any paramount value? If, in fact, he's a specialist in adaptation and the necessity of adaptation, then he should be a believer in the Bible simply on the adaptability basis of it.
See, so now, again, he was just slamming postmodernism a couple minutes ago. Now, again, he's making the postmodernist argument. What even is truth, bro? What even is truth?
You should be a Christian because it is useful to be a Christian.
The idea that you need Christianity to make society function smoothly. Think about how absurd that is. And this is what he's pushing.
Because that's what evolution says. Evolution is all about utility. Evolution is not about fundamental truth. But he says you have to discard the Bible because it is, quote unquote, not fundamentally true because you can't prove the miracles. You can't prove God. Okay, but in what world, in your world, why does truth with a capital T matter?
Because he's not a postmodernist like you.
You live in evolutionary meme land, right? The basic idea that genes are self-replicating and seek to survive. And all of that is predicated on a notion of adaptability and utility. It is not predicated on a notion of truth. So you can't rely upon my religious notions of truth in order to knock out the Bible. Number two, why exactly shouldn't it be true? If it is proved that Western civilization is in fact the highest form of civilization that man has experienced, and it is rooted in Christian and Judaic values, there are two possibilities. One, it's a necessary myth, a Platonic necessary myth. And two, is maybe there's truth to it.
What a massive overreach. This is where people like Richard Dawkins would have a field day and just point to like the thousands of contradictions and dumb statements and things that make no sense and things that didn't happen and are impossible, that you point all that stuff out in the Christian tradition, in the Bible, etc. Like, look at his face. Look at his face here. So smug and so wrong. Again, the assumption here is you need Christianity or a Judeo-Christian framework to make a society function well. And that's just not true. It's just not. In fact, I think more often than not, religiosity as the basis of a society hurts. It doesn't help. It leads to more tribalism. It leads to more injustice. It leads to more arbitrary rules, censorship, authoritarianism. And so, like, the whole framework of what he's saying here is wrong. But by the way, that's also, why I sort of disagreed with Dawkins too, is that I'm like, why are you calling yourself a cultural Christian? It's giving Christianity too much credit to sort of assume that, well, obviously positive things came out of that. Obviously, that's the basis of our society, and I like that it led to these positive outcomes. No longer should anybody give credit to Christianity or Judaism or the Judeo-Christian framework for advancements that came about as a direct result of the Enlightenment and secularism and humanism and universalism. So, I don't know. We'll finish this up, but I think our points are clear at this point.
And maybe it seems that while people like Richard Dawkins can individually reject the premises of the Bible while accepting the conclusions, maybe it turns out that the vast majority of the population cannot and should not. Maybe it turns out that we need more Christians going to church, and we need more Jews going to synagogue. Maybe that's actually really important to a civilization. Otherwise, you end up in the muck that we currently find ourselves. What I would say to Richard Dawkins is, if you like the Christmas carols, someone needs to believe in Christ to sing them. If you like the churches, somebody has to go to church to actually maintain the church. If you like the civilization in which you live, somebody's got to maintain those biblical roots. Somebody's got to go to the garden and cultivate and guard it. It's pretty important. Are you tired of...
Okay, hilarious. Right after his postmodernist rant, at the end of it, facts is on the screen. You were just the one arguing that facts don't really matter. And maybe the Bible is true. God. I think I've said all I need to say. This is just sad at this point. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop. And watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.